The morning sun filtered through my bedroom window, casting long golden streaks across the wooden floor as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. It had been 3 weeks since my last visit to James's cabin, and our connection had deepened with each passing day. What began as an unexpected encounter in the meadow had blossomed into something neither of us could have anticipated, a friendship that challenged conventional boundaries while respecting the natural rhythms of our individual journeys. Our conversations, whether conducted over crackling fires or during quiet moments in the forest, continued to peel back layers of understanding about relationships, identity, and authenticity. Each interaction felt like stepping stones across a river, leading us toward a destination we were both eager yet cautious to reach. The compass James had returned to me now rested on my nightstand, its worn surface catching the morning light, serving as both a literal and metaphorical guide to where we were heading. I rolled onto my side, watching dust motes dance in the sunlight, and felt a familiar warmth spread through my chest. The memory of James's presence in his cabin, the way he moved with deliberate grace, how his eyes seemed to see beyond surfaces, filled my mind. We had shared countless hours discussing everything from wilderness survival to philosophical musings on human connection, yet there remained an unspoken current between us, a potential energy waiting to transform into something more tangible. As I prepared for the day, my thoughts kept returning to our last conversation. We had discussed the transformative power of nature, how it could strip away societal constructs and reveal one's true self. This idea resonated deeply with my own experiences of finding freedom in nudity amidst the wilderness. The thought of sharing this aspect of myself with James, of inviting him to experience this raw connection with nature, had been growing in my mind like a seed reaching for sunlight. With a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation, I sent James a message suggesting a hike together. Not just any hike, but one that would take us to a special place I knew deep in the wilderness. A plateau of grass that stretched endlessly toward the horizon, hidden from view by surrounding ridges and ancient trees. A place where the sky seemed closer, the air purer, and the call of the wild more insistent. James's response came quickly, his words carrying the same quiet confidence that characterized everything about him. "I'd like that," he wrote. "Let's see where the path leads us." His acceptance wasn't just about agreeing to a hike. It was an acknowledgement of the journey we were embarking upon together, one that promised to challenge our boundaries while honoring our mutual respect for nature's wisdom. As I packed my gear for the day ahead, I couldn't help but feel that this hike would mark a significant turning point in our relationship. The compass on my nightstand seemed to hum with agreement as I slipped it into my pocket, its needle pointing not just north, but toward possibilities that made my heart race with both excitement and uncertainty. The trailhead appeared before us like an invitation, framed by towering pines whose needles whispered secrets to the morning breeze. James stood beside me, his backpack slung casually over one shoulder, surveying the path with an expression that mirrored my own mix of anticipation and reverence. We had chosen a route less traveled, one that wound through dense forest before emerging onto the hidden plateau I had described. As we began our ascent, the forest enveloped us in its embrace, filtering the sunlight into dappled patterns that danced across the trail. The air carried the earthy scent of moss and decaying leaves, mingling with the sweet fragrance of wildflowers that peeked through the undergrowth. Each step we took seemed to deepen our connection, not just to the land, but to each other. Our conversation flowed naturally, touching on everything from the subtle changes in vegetation to personal stories we hadn't yet shared. About halfway up the trail, we reached a particularly steep section where roots formed natural steps through the incline. Without thinking, I extended my hand to help James navigate the tricky passage. When our fingers touched, a jolt of electricity ran through me, more intense than any previous contact. James paused, looking at our joined hands with an expression that suggested he had felt it too. Neither of us pulled away immediately, instead allowing the moment to stretch, acknowledging the shift in our dynamic without words. The higher we climbed, the thinner the air became, carrying with it a crispness that invigorated our senses. James occasionally stopped to examine interesting plants or geological formations, his knowledge of the local ecosystem adding depth to our journey. At one point, he pointed out a rare species of lichen growing on a rock face, explaining how it indicated the purity of the environment. His passion for these details mirrored my own fascination with capturing nature's beauty through photography, creating another layer of connection between us. When we finally emerged from the tree line onto the plateau, the transformation was breathtaking. The grass stretched endlessly before us, swaying gently in the breeze like a green ocean. The sky above seemed impossibly vast, painted with wisps of clouds that cast moving shadows across the landscape. James stood beside me, his breath catching audibly as he took in the view. For several minutes, we simply stood there, letting the magnitude of the moment sink in. "This is incredible," James said finally, his voice carrying a weight that suggested he understood the significance of this place beyond its physical beauty. "You were right to bring me here." His words carried a double meaning that hung in the air between us, acknowledging both the natural wonder before us and the deeper connection we were building. As we walked further onto the plateau, I felt the familiar pull of the wild calling to me, stronger than ever in James's presence. The idea that had been forming in my mind since we started dating, the desire to share this most intimate aspect of myself with him, crystallized into clarity. Here, in this sacred space, surrounded by nothing but nature's purity, it felt right to suggest what I had been contemplating. "James," I began, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach, "there's something I want to share with you. Something that's become very important to me in my relationship with nature." I paused, gauging his reaction. His eyes met mine with their usual calm intensity, encouraging me to continue. "I found that being naked in the wilderness allows me to connect with nature in the most authentic way possible, to shed not just clothes, but all the layers society imposes on us." I watched as understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by a flicker of hesitation. "I know it might sound strange," I rushed to add, "but here, in this place, it feels necessary, like the next logical step in our journey together." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. James turned away, walking a few paces before stopping to gaze out at the endless expanse of grass. I gave him space, knowing this was a significant request. After several minutes, he spoke without turning around. "I understand why it's important to you, and I respect that. But for me," he trailed off, then faced me again. "It's not something I've ever considered before. The vulnerability of it, it's daunting." His honesty touched me deeply. "I'm not asking you to do anything you're uncomfortable with," I assured him. "But if you're willing to try, even just once, I think it could be transformative. Not just physically, but emotionally. It's about embracing who we are, completely and without shame, in the presence of someone who truly sees us." We spent the next hour discussing the concept, exploring our feelings about vulnerability, intimacy, and the boundaries we were both comfortable pushing. James's initial resistance gradually gave way to curiosity, then to cautious acceptance. "If I agree to this," he said finally, "it has to be on my terms. No pressure, no expectations beyond experiencing the moment authentically." Of course, I agreed immediately. This isn't about performance or proving anything. It's about connection, with nature, with ourselves, and with each other. As we reached this understanding, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for James's willingness to consider stepping outside his comfort zone, just as I appreciated his insistence on maintaining his boundaries. The wind picked up slightly, carrying with it the scent of wild grass and distant pine. James looked around at the empty plateau, then back at me. "Let's do it," he said finally, his voice carrying both determination and a hint of nervous excitement. "But let's take it slowly. Together." As James and I began removing our clothing, the act itself became a ritual of trust and vulnerability. We moved slowly, deliberately, folding each garment with care as if preparing offerings to the wilderness. The cool breeze played across our skin, raising goosebumps that had nothing to do with temperature. With each piece of clothing removed, I felt layers of societal expectation peeling away, leaving behind only the essence of who we were. James paused after removing his shirt, standing bare-chested with his arms crossed protectively across his chest. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the desire to embrace this experience warring with years of conditioned modesty. "It's okay," I reassured him softly, taking a step closer but respecting his need for space. "There's no rush. Just focus on how the air feels against your skin, how the sunlight warms your body." The moment when James finally stepped completely free of his clothing transformed the atmosphere between us. Where there had been careful consideration and measured steps, there now existed a raw authenticity that made my breath catch in my throat. He stood tall despite his obvious vulnerability, meeting my gaze with a mixture of defiance and trust that spoke volumes about his courage. We began walking across the plateau, our bare feet pressing into the cool grass. Each step felt like a declaration of freedom, a rejection of artificial constraints. The sensation of the breeze moving freely across every inch of skin created an intoxicating awareness of our bodies and the natural world around us. James's initial stiffness gradually melted away as he became more comfortable with the exposure, his movements becoming more fluid and natural. "I never imagined it would feel like this," James admitted after we'd walked in silence for several minutes. "It's liberating, exhilarating." His voice carried a note of wonder that matched the expression on his face. "The air feels different somehow, more alive." As we explored the plateau, our connection deepened with each passing moment. We discovered a patch of wildflowers blooming in vibrant colors, their petals brushing against our legs as we walked among them. The contrast between their delicate beauty and our exposed vulnerability created a harmony that felt almost sacred. James reached out to touch a particularly striking bloom, his fingers lingering on its petals before turning to look at me with an expression that suggested he was seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time. The afternoon sun warmed our skin as we lay together in the grass, watching clouds drift across the endless blue sky. The boundary between our bodies and the earth beneath us seemed to dissolve, creating a sense of unity with our surroundings that transcended mere physical exposure. James's initial hesitations had completely disappeared, replaced by a radiant openness that transformed his entire presence. Our exploration of the plateau led us to a secluded hollow surrounded by tall grass, creating a natural sanctuary within the vast openness. Here, protected from prying eyes yet fully exposed to the elements, we allowed ourselves to explore the intimacy that had been building between us. The act itself became an extension of our connection with nature, each touch echoing the caress of the breeze, each kiss mirroring the sweetness of wildflowers. In this sacred space, with nothing between us and the world but our own skin, we discovered new dimensions of intimacy. The vulnerability we had embraced through nudity became a gateway to emotional depths neither of us had anticipated. Our lovemaking was slow and deliberate, each movement an affirmation of trust and acceptance. The sounds of nature, rustling grass, distant bird calls, the whisper of wind, provided a symphony that elevated our experience beyond mere physical pleasure. Afterward, as we lay entwined in the grass, I traced patterns on James's skin with my fingertips, marveling at how natural this felt. The initial awkwardness of exposing ourselves so completely had transformed into a profound understanding of each other's bodies and souls. James's breathing slowed to match mine, our hearts beating in rhythm with the pulse of the earth beneath us. "This changes everything," James murmured, his voice carrying both awe and certainty. "Not just between us, but how I see myself, how I relate to the world." His words captured perfectly what I had been feeling, that this experience wasn't just about physical intimacy or even our relationship, but about embracing authenticity in its purest form. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, we dressed slowly, reluctant to cover our newly discovered freedom. The fabric of our clothing felt foreign against skin that had grown accustomed to unrestricted movement. Yet rather than diminishing our connection, the act of dressing seemed to seal the experience, making it a cherished memory rather than a fleeting moment. Standing together on the edge of the plateau, watching the light fade across the landscape, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. This journey, from strangers in the woods to partners in vulnerability, had transformed not just our relationship, but our understanding of ourselves and our place in the natural world. The call of the wild had led us to discover depths of intimacy and authenticity that neither of us could have anticipated, creating a bond that felt as eternal as the mountains surrounding us. As twilight settled over the plateau, James and I began our descent back to civilization, our steps synchronized in a rhythm that reflected our newfound harmony. The journey down felt different from our ascent, lighter, freer, as if we carried less weight despite our packs remaining unchanged. Each step seemed to echo through the forest, not with the sound of boots on earth, but with the resonance of transformed understanding. Reaching the trailhead, we paused, both aware that this marked a threshold between two worlds. Behind us lay the wild expanse where we had shed not just our clothing, but layers of pretense and fear. Ahead stretched the path back to Cedarbrook, where society's expectations waited like shadows lengthening in the evening light. Yet neither of us felt the usual tension that accompanied such transitions. Instead, there was a quiet confidence, born from knowing we had faced our deepest vulnerabilities together and emerged stronger. During the drive back, our conversation flowed easily between practical matters, dinner plans, work commitments, and reflections on our experience. James spoke about how the plateau had changed his perspective on boundaries, both physical and emotional. "I always thought vulnerability was something to be managed, controlled," he mused. "But today showed me it's something to be embraced, celebrated even. Like those wildflowers we saw, they don't hide their beauty. They offer it freely to the wind and sun." His words resonated deeply with my own evolving understanding. The compass in my pocket seemed to hum with agreement, its needle pointing not just toward direction, but toward growth. I realized that our experience hadn't been about rejecting societal norms entirely, but about integrating them with our authentic selves. The balance between civilization and wilderness, between connection and independence, had shifted but not disappeared. Arriving back in Cedarbrook, we found the town bathed in the golden glow of streetlights just coming on. The familiar buildings and streets felt both comforting and transformed, viewed now through eyes that had seen beyond their constructed boundaries. As we walked to my apartment, neighbors greeted us with smiles that seemed warmer, more genuine than before. Perhaps they sensed the change in us, or perhaps we were simply more open to seeing their humanity. Inside, I brewed tea while James examined the photographs displayed on my walls. His gaze lingered on the image from our first encounter, the one where I reached skyward in the meadow. "You were searching for something then," he observed. "Now I understand what it was." His insight struck me with its accuracy. I had been seeking not just artistic expression or natural connection, but the kind of authentic relationship we were now building. That night, as we sat by the fire in my small living room, the events of the day crystallized into understanding. Our relationship had evolved beyond friendship or romance into something more profound, a partnership based on mutual vulnerability and growth. The wilderness had served as both catalyst and witness to this transformation, providing a space where societal constructs dissolved, leaving only truth. Looking ahead, I envisioned our future unfolding like the changing seasons, periods of growth alternating with times of rest, each phase enriching the next. The plateau experience had opened doors to deeper intimacy while reinforcing our individual strengths. We had learned that true connection requires not just sharing joy, but also supporting each other through challenges, much like the ecosystem we had immersed ourselves in. As sleep claimed us, curled together on the couch with the fire's embers glowing softly, I understood that our journey was far from over. Each day would bring new opportunities to explore the boundaries between civilization and wilderness, between individuality and partnership. The compass that had guided us thus far would continue to point toward growth, reminding us that the call of the wild wasn't something external to answer, but an internal truth to embrace. In this moment of quiet reflection, surrounded by the evidence of our shared experiences, I knew that our story was just beginning. The plateau had marked a significant chapter, but the narrative of our lives together would continue to unfold, shaped by the lessons of that day and the infinite possibilities that lay ahead.